Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another session of Sybeco. Today we are hosting Luca Mangili. Is that right? Yeah. Luca completed his bachelor's degree in biological sciences at the University of Milan and did his master's in neurobiology at the University of Pavia in Italy. His master's thesis was focused on cell biology and multiple sclerosis. And after that, he came to Netherlands to do his PhD, and he switched to neuroscience. A little bit like myself, I was also more in cell molecular biology, and I switched to neuro for my PhD. His research focuses on cerebrocerebellar communication, attention switching, and time perception. His PhD is shared between two labs under the supervision of Chris Zhu and Devika Narain. His work at Erasmus is focused on using electrophysiology, optogenetics, and behavior training in mice. And he's going to tell us about, I guess, time perception in humans, primarily using behavioral readouts from human subjects. And I guess that's what he's going to talk about.
Yeah,
Well,
precisely.
Thank you, Luca.
All right, thank you very much. I'm gonna share my screen. And you will see?
Yes, it's all good.
All right. Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to tell you a bit about my PhD work together with the Devika and Narain lab. It consists of understanding flexible motor timing behaviors and linking them to their plausible neural circuits. Let me start this talk by giving you a bit of background to introduce you to the topic. We started our project taking into account the duality of the learning rates in the two main domains of neuroscience, cognition and motor neuroscience. Now, starting with cognition, I would like to start with a book from Daniel Kahneman that he wrote in 2011 titled Thinking Fast and Slow. Now, this book recapitulates the research that supports that automatic, implicit learning process are intuitive and quick, whereas explicit cognition is tends to require more effort and time, and therefore is considered slow. Now, interestingly, the very opposite is true for motor neuroscience, in which pioneers of the dual rate model for motor adaptation and learning and subsequent work in the field has linked the fast processes to explicit learning and the slow processes to implicit behavior. This is also especially well studied for visual motor adaptation. But to give you an example for this kind of dual rate model of learning, for instance, if I want to learn to play an instrument to produce a piece of music, by the time that it will become a motor implicit task, for instance, the fingers on a guitar or on a piano, it takes enough time to become a slow implicit learning, and therefore it's actually slower. Now, in our department, most of the labs of this place are focusing on cerebellum and in general on the communication between cerebellar cortex and the cerebral cortex. So we came into this world from the perspective of the communication from these two very important area. And we were very glad to find these few clues in the literature that could kind of point the way for us, especially from Rich Ivory, Jordan Taylor, and Sam McDougall. They stated that, well, they linked the implicit motor learning to the cerebellar circuitry, whereas the explicit was linked to the cerebellar, to the cerebral circuit. Now,
Question, Luca. For motor, implicit and explicit are, like implicit is basically when it becomes like muscle memory. For cognitive, can you give an example of implicit and explicit?
Yes, the cognition. I was thinking more as a way of thinking. So it's explicit when it requires. It's still cognitive, but it requires more effort than the implicit thinkings. So, for instance, the implicit ones can be seen as some kind of a reflexive response, whereas the explicit ones are the proper line of thought, so a flow of consciousness that derives from the origin of thinking.
Right. But if we call it kind of reflexive way of cognition as implicit, then for motor also reflexes are fast.
Sorry, forgive me.
For motor, I'm saying reflex is fast. What is slow is so I'm saying it seems to me like we have different definitions for implicit and explicit, or at least implicit between the two, and that's why one becomes slow, the other becomes fast.
Yes. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think at a certain point we will converge to the same kind of definition of explicit and implicit during the talk.
Okay, yeah, that's good. But this has been
Okay.
always very confusing to me, and I think part of it is semantics.
Yeah, I completely agree. Also, for me, when I started to work on this project, it took me the first months was to understand this slide, literally this concept. So yeah, we can definitely speculate about it later on. All right, so we wanted to study this from the perspective of temporal control. And where does temporal control lies? Well, we believe that it lies at the boundaries between cognition and motor neuroscience. So it kind of straddle both the cognitive and the motor domains. So we asked whether we could merge and yoke the cerebellar cortical system together through behavior and investigate their neural underpinnings and the dynamics. So to tell you what I did, I want to take you through this research by covering, first of all, this new human paradigm that has been developed by our lab, to then show the results of our task with our human participants. Afterwards, I'm going to talk about the effect of a cognitive strategy on our task, so using a cognitive over strategy. And then I'm going to summarize and give you the conclusions of this talk. So let's work with the paradigm. Let's start with the paradigm. It's a cortico-cerebellar paradigm that we use to study implicit and explicit temporal learnings. So the idea was to couple two different behaviors that we studied in the lab, we already knew, and which cortical and cerebellar origins we already understood. Respectively, I'm talking about an explicit learning of a context-dependent button press that is related to medial prefrontal cortex and has been studied by my supervisor Devika in the MPFC of macacus. And the implicit learning, there is a well-known Pavlovian conditioning, that is the Ibling conditioning, and which cerebellar underpinnings are very well known too. So, okay, let me explain you the paradigm. This paradigm consists of a virtual reality setup in which participants are head fixed. They are sitting on a chair in front of a desk. They are placing their head on this head fixing setup, and they are wearing a custom-made air puff delivery system that is pointing to the right corner of the right eye. Now, in front of them, there is a monitor, a keyboard that is not in this picture, but imagine a keyboard, and a high-speed infrared camera that is directed to the eye, where also the puff delivery system is directed, and it serves us to track eyelid movements. Now, the experiment consists of 600 trials per participant. It is divided in 3 sessions of 200 trials each. And how does it work? On each trial, the participant from the monitor in front of him will be presented with a 3D rendering of a tunnel that can be either dark or light. Now, this duality of color represents a context, so what we call a contextual clue. After a transient period of time that it's maximum 1.5 seconds, and it's sampled from from a distribution, a discrete exponential distribution, participants are presented with a brief flash of light that is called Q. Now this represents the starting moment, the time zero, in which the participants are required to produce an interval of time, to start an interval. And after this flash, they will see again the tunnel, which will be placed in motion, giving them the idea of kind of running, walking into the tunnel itself. Now, what do they have to do? They have to press the spacebar of the keyboard in front of them to stop the tunnel after the starting moment, for the dark tunnel at respectively 800 milliseconds and for the light tunnel at 1600 milliseconds. Now, how do they learn? So if the pressing of the spacebar is outside this desired window of time, the participant will be air puffed, so it will receive a periocular air puff from the custom-made delivery system on the corner of the right eye. And this will serve them as an error feedback to understand that there was an incorrect trial, and therefore they should change their timing, their responsive strategy, until they will actually end up in a trial in which the button press will lie in the correct window of time. The puff will not be presented, and therefore they know that this is a correct trial, and they have to kind of stick with that response timing. Now, it's important to know that we call this omission window because when the participant press the spacebar within this correct window of time, the air puff is omitted. So there is no puff, okay? Now, here we are talking about the paradigm, but as you may recall, in classical eye blink conditioning, so the Pavlovian...
Yes. Luca, question. Could you go back? Yeah, so I want to make sure we understand the paradigm. That's pretty important.
Of course.
So there are two different contexts.
Yes.
One dark, one light. And then a cue is presented, and the subject's task is to time either 800 millisecond or 1600, depending on the dark light context, and press a button.
Precisely.
And report their time estimation.
Yes.
If they don't do it right, you deliver an air puff to their eyes.
Exactly.
And I guess what is the blue? What is blue and what is red there? I'm confused what those two mean.
Over here, we use this color code to represent respectively the dark and the light tunnel.
Okay, so the air puff will be omitted.
When yes, so the air puff will be omitted when the participant will press the spacebar within this respective window of time. There is also important to know there is a Weber fraction related window of time. So according to the phenomenon that is called temporal scalar variability, we introduce a range of time within we consider the response correct. There is a 10% of the intervals. Okay, so that was my other question. That for the 800 millisecond time estimation, so there is a window, let's say plus minus 50, something like that. Oh, forgive me. Yeah. Right, and then outside that, if they didn't if they didn't press button, then you're going to deliver an air puff after that window. Yes. Okay. Also before, so these blue and red are representing the window of time in which the participant will get a puff if it's where the button press will lie. So it can be before the desired window of time or afterwards, still the puff will be delivered. Okay, now I understand. Right, right. So all of that range can give them an air puff if they press the button. Yes. Okay, now I understand. That exactly. Part, yeah, okay, thank you. Of course, whenever you want, feel free to interrupt me. So, yeah, exactly. So starting from this explanation, we deliver a puff everywhere but when the participant will reply correctly to the context by pressing the spacebar. But in eye blink conditioning, in the classical one, the very opposite happens because the mouse is given, if we take in the example of the mouse is given Yes. A pairing of stimuli, a conditioned stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus. The condition is represented by a light or a tone, and the unconditioned stimulus is again the puff. Now, initially, the eye in the presence of the puff will close reflexively, as we saw over here. But during the learning, in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus, so only at the presentation of the conditioned one, we see an eyelid closure that is happening at the correct time, so slightly before the air puff is expected to come. So arguably, the cerebellum learns the time interval at which the puff is supposed to come, and it closes the eye to protect it from the air puff. But in our paradigm, that's not what is happening, because there is no air puff within the omission window. The air puff is always outside. So being correct, in theory, shouldn't elicit any puff, and therefore there should be no reason to close the eye. Now, the infrared camera that is placed in front of the participant showed a clear eyelid closure that is represented by this trace on trials that were incorrect. So after puff, eyelid closure, because it's an eye blink as a reflexive response. But to our great surprise, we found well-timed conditioned eye blink responses also in the absence of the puff. So when the participant responded correctly, staying within the omission window, we saw after a few trials, as you can see, they're gradually increasing in normalized amplitude. We see these well-timed eye blink responses. So now an important question.
Luca, question
yes.
again, to make sure we follow the behavior. It's a pretty complex and a very smart behavior, by the way.
Thank you.
So I see how you have combined both this implicit and explicit. It's very intelligent. Okay, so then if you could go back one slide. So the subject press, as soon as they press in the wrong time window, they receive the air puff. So the press is immediately followed by an air puff.
Yes, immediately, yes.
Right. And now, so then there is a window. What is the performance rate here? So I'm curious how many of the trials end up having an air puff.
Yeah, so I'm going to show that in a bit.
Okay. And then if you could go a couple more slides where you were showing the, here. So green here is mean of, what do you mean by mean of omission window? So it's the omission window for for either the short or the long.
It's separately, respectively, for the short and the long. We take in account the mean of the omission window, so the web refraction related window, and we take the mean. Now it's red when the trial is incorrect, so it's outside the omission window, and it's green to signal the correctness of the trial itself.
Okay, and whether it's before or after the omission window, you see the same thing?
We do see a distribution that it's both before and after. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm actually about to show it in the next slide, because exactly for this, a very important question arises, which is whether the predictive eye blink elicited in the absence of the puff was conditioned to the response in the response to the cue in a classical manner, or instead it was conditioned to the manual button press. In other words, it means, is it possible that simply they blinked simultaneously or right after the button press? So we performed a correlation analysis on our 64 participants in total. They are divided in more experimental group, but it's a total of 64 participants. Here I'm just showing a subset of these participants, and we found no systematic correlation. So as you can see, these are the button press responses and the eye blink responses, only considering the ones in which the trial is correct. That's why you see them being around 800 milliseconds and 1600 milliseconds for the light. And apparently there is no systematic correlation between these two effector in time responses. All right, so having after assessing that there was no systematic correlation between these two effectors, let me tell you about the results. So let's see what is happening in this task. Now, here I'm showing in the top panel, this plot represents each dot a timing response, respectively for the dark tunnel in red and the light tunnel in this light blue, for one individual example participant, and the average of our 30 participants, which is the first experimental group consisting of 30 out of 64. And well, as you can see, both for the individual participants and mainly for the average of the 30 participants, we found that the task was not entirely trivial, as in participants took around 100 or even 200 or 300 trials to actually diverge and getting stably, in a stable way, asymptotic to the desired window of time. So to press the spacebar at the correct, within the correct omission window, it took around 100 or 200 trials, even more. Now, if we plot the same kind of results for the eye blink responses, and it's very important to notice that over here, these in each dot is representing the timing response of only the conditioned eyelid closure, meaning that these are only responses for the eyelid closures when the button press was within the correct omission window. So that's why you see that they are less, of course, but it's very important to notice that, first of all, that they're quite frequent, despite there being less, of course, but they're quite frequent. But also, they rapidly get asymptotic to these stable values, and they're well divided and separated in time. So it is quite unsurprising.
Question, Luca,
Please,
could you go
tell me.
back? Okay. So subjects learn to estimate the 500, the 800 and 1600 millisecond. And they have also learned that if they don't do it right, they're gonna get an air puff. So this eye blind conditioning happens in the background without them even noticing or deciding on it. And then you go and you take all the correct trials and you see when this, now you focus on the eyelid responses and you see when the CR happened.
Yeah.
And you're showing us that in the 800 millisecond trials, the CR onset is 800 millisecond. So what that tells me is that on the majority of incorrect 800 millisecond trials, the subject pressed the button late, so they received the air puff after 800 milliseconds, so that's why they start. So the 800 millisecond basically is like the CS for them.
That's precisely correct. That's exactly what happens.
So then they did not have that many air puffs earlier. The majority of incorrect trials should be later, after the window. Otherwise, the CR onset should be.
Well, there are also well, yeah. I mean, this interpolates the data, as you can see. Like for instance, for these few light blue responses, those are incorrect trials that are happening way before the desired window of time. So here the participants saw the light tunnel and it pressed the spacebar around, I would say, 600, arguably, milliseconds. So way before the desired window of time, and they get the puff at that timing.
Okay, so this is actually very helpful, and thanks for showing me that, because the figure is there. So what I'm seeing for 800 after they reach the kind of stable performance, it's really around. So it's not that the majority of incorrect or outside the window. It's really, there are a lot of them quite earlier. When I say outside, I mean later. So then why is it that the CR onset would be 800 and not earlier? Because each of those dots on the left side that is outside the gray box has received an air puff. So that's telling us about air puff timing. So air puff has started, let's focus only on the 800 for now. Any time from, I don't know what's the time scale here, but let's say any time from maybe 600 millisecond all the way to 1600 millisecond. So I guess it's the mean of that distribution. So it's just the mean of when the air puff happened that dictates the onset of the CR.
It's the mean of where the air puff happens that dictates the emergence of the CR.
I'm a bit surprised that the emergence of the CR is at 800 millisecond, while a lot of the air puffs that the subject received happened earlier than.
That's why we are also very surprised. I completely agree. That's why, I mean, again, ideally, considering these, considering that the puff is everywhere besides the correct window of time, there should be no reason at all to close the eye preemptively when you are within this range of time. But that's still what happens in our results.
Okay, at least I want to make sure I understood the thing,
Of
that
course,
they
of course.
really have a range of response times around that window, around that optimal response time, but the CR onset seems to be converging on those. Yeah, okay.
On those stable values, yeah, exactly.
Yes, okay, let's keep going.
All right. So now if we check the manual timer responses, it is quite unsurprising that after within 600 trials, at a certain point, they actually participants start to increase their performance for the manual task. So the percentage goes up to more than 50%, meaning that at trial number 600, out of 4 context presentation, 2 times the participant will press the space bar in the correct window of time. And we do see that these response timings, as we see exactly over here, they are well separated in time. Now we're taking in account just after this trial number, because for the feature of being so sparse as data, because they really don't know the results, we couldn't make an analysis out of this. We made an analysis out of those results, of course. So we see that they're very they were separated, but and this is not surprising. What is very surprising, as we just said together, is despite the eye blink conditioning is largely considered to be kind of unsophisticated and unflexible and simple, here it appears to be depending on the contextual clue as much as the manual button press. So this means that on one trial, the participant is presented with a dark tunnel, and the participant will close his eyes preemptively at around 800 milliseconds. And on the very next trial, if the tunnel is light, the eye will close preemptively at a different timing. But in a motor behavior that it's not, well, for what we know, is not considered to be that flexible at all. So that was very surprising to us.
Question, Luca. So the 2 trial types, are they presented in blocks or are they randomized?
They are completely randomized. Completely.
I see.
They can happen 3 dark, 1 light, and whatever. Also, within the tunnel, let me show you very briefly again these. Within the tunnel, you might see patterns. Also, the geometrical patterns inside the tunnel are completely randomized to avoid that any participant could associate a dark smudge or a spot to a desired interval of time. Those were completely randomly generated.
In that figure, it's not clear how long passes from the onset of the context to the onset of the cue.
Yeah, because it's never, it's also random. It's sampled from a discrete exponential distribution, so it's never the same. Also, to avoid that the participant could make an association between those two.
But it's about a few seconds. What's the range?
It's maximum 1.5 seconds. It can be 0.2. It can be 1.3. It's sampled randomly to avoid any kind of association between those two. So we wanted to make it purely associated to the context instead of the timing between the context and the cue and the tunnel that is again placed in motion. Okay, now to continue analysis, we took in account the trial number at which these response timings were getting asymptotic to the stable and desired values. So we can call it a rate learning or learning time. So when they start to get like here asymptotic within the Weber fraction related omission window, we considered it as a trial number, the learning rate, and we made a comparison between the learning rates for eyelid closure, so this conditioned eye blink, and the manual task. And we saw that for both dark and light tunnel, this eye blink conditioning was learned faster than the button press. This means that on average, for participants, they learned to preemptively close their eye at the right time based on the context, then they actually, more rapidly than they learn to press the spacebar within the correct window of time. Does it make sense? Should I go through it again?
No, I guess it kind of makes sense. I mean, eye blink
well, we started from a complete opposite assumption, as in this kind of implicit should be, well, non faster than a manual cortical
but then
button
eye
press.
blink is a result of incorrect button press. So I guess it emerges faster because we start with incorrect button presses. So it's like we're delivering air puffs.
We are delivering air puffs.
So if it was a very fast learning, then eye blink would be slow. But learning button press is slow. As a result, they receive a lot of air puffs, and as a result, eye blink conditioning happens.
Yes, but the blink conditioning, in theory, consider how a blink conditioning structure should happen at the timings in which usually the participant get the air puff. But here it happens within the omission window, so completely outside this.
That I agree, but I'm kind of waiting to see the distribution of air puff times for the two contexts, because I think that should give us some clue. And I guess we have some question from Sana.
Yes, sorry. But you mean that the participant has an idea that he's doing wrong, but the motor command is not perfectly right. So even though they did not press the button in the perfect timing, but they know that they're going to receive the punishment and they close their eyes.
They don't necessarily know that they will receive an air puff because they still don't know the right interval of time. Afterwards, when they learn it, they try to stick with that, but they cannot preemptively imagine I am going to be within the correct or not. We're talking about hundreds of milliseconds, so they won't know until they actually get the puff or not, if they are within or not the window of time. When they are within the window of time, most of times we see a sparse distribution of these eyelid closures that we believe are completely conditioned to the context.
I get it.
It's actually amazing what you guys have done. So many people use air puffs as punishment, and I guess everyone has been ignoring to look at the eyelid, because you use air puff as punishment many times. Then this punishment is associated with a cue that the subject missed. So this must happen in the background, the eye blink conditioning. It's
precisely that's exactly what we believe.
Exactly, now, and it's really beautiful what you guys have done.
Thank you. I really appreciate what you're saying, but also don't get me wrong, my participants hate me because they received hundreds of puff, of course, within 1 hour and a half.
Well, we know now what we do to our mice. So.
Exactly. I put them in the condition of understanding our mice models. I also participated before learning the task, so now I also know what they feel. All right. Now, since we are talking about implicitness and explicitness of this task, we based based on earlier work, we wanted to give an assessment of this implicitness. So we wanted to investigate the implicit nature of this condition response via giving our participants a questionnaire. that is consistent with works from pioneers in the fields. I'm thinking, for instance, about the paper from Clark Esquire in 1998. They give this questionnaire containing questions about features of the task that it's also enabling conditioning, considering like how aware were you from 0 to 10, 1 to 10, about this feature, about this color of the color of the tunnel, the shape of the tunnel, that you were reflexively closing your eyelid after the puff, how many times did you notice that the puff was not presented, and these kind of questionnaires to validate the implicitness of the task. So we found that the reported awareness of our participants for the conditioned eye blink response, considering a range from 0 to 1, was significantly lower than the one reported for the unconditioned response. So the blink evoked by the presence of the puff. And this was also significantly lower than the reported awareness for the manual button press task. So this could serve us to specifically give an assessment on how implicit our eye blink conditioning actually was, to avoid any.
One thing that is surprising to me is that their awareness for the flash, and I guess by the flash you mean the cue.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bit surprising. I mean, if they don't have awareness, so yeah,
I completely agree,
that,
but
yeah.
So what I also find it surprising, but I would say that having structured the experiment, of course, so I know better. The flash was very brief, so I don't necessarily get super surprised if a few participants even mentally skipped, unconsciously avoided to focus on the flash itself. So also we're talking about a task with 600 trials. It lasts from 1 hour up to 1 hour and a half, even longer, depending on the average of the responses of the participants. It can be quite, well, tiring, and therefore this implicitness was much less for the conditional response than for whatever other feature of the task.
Okay, thanks. And another question, were they given any instructions or they had to figure out the task structure all by trial and error?
That's a fantastic question. So these participants for this first experimental group were called naive because the only thing that they were told was you are required to press the spacebar of this keyboard in order to avoid as many times as you can an air puff to the eye. So by pressing the spacebar correctly or not, the task will be.
But they knew
advanced
it's a timing task, or not
They
even
knew
that.
they knew that it's a timing task, but they had no idea about the dual context nature of the experiment. So they had no idea that for one tunnel they have to produce one interval, and for the other tunnel they had to produce another interval. For them, it was I need to produce an interval of time after I see the flash and the tunnel will be placed in motion to avoid the path. That's the only instruction that we gave them.
Yeah, I mean, if it takes humans about 150 trials to figure, or actually more, 250, then it's not too surprising that it takes our mice 3 weeks.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
I also believe it's
and with zero instruction for mice, so they even
exactly. Right. So to continue, we introduced a control experiment because we wanted to study the influence of the tunnel stimuli. So the color of the tunnel, the context of the tunnel, and the contrast from that with learning. So we performed this control experiment on a separate group of participants where we inverted the timings. In other words, contrary to what was before, the dark tunnel is now signaling a desired interval of time that is 1600 milliseconds, and the light one is signaling a desired interval of time that is the shorter one, so 800 milliseconds, just to study the influence of the contrast of these two stimuli on the learning. So we checked again the performance on our participants, and this is a definitely smaller group, it's 7 participants, but it was just to perform this control experiment, and they were also able to learn this inverted task for both the manual button press task and the eyelid closure responses, so the conditioned eye blink responses. And well, we kind of saw a recapitulation of all the metrics that we saw for the main experiment. So they generated a well-timed manual response that was well separated, and with a hit rate performance that was increasing for the button press for the average of both condition and separately dark and light, as well as the context-dependent eye blink responses on correct trials. So again, with a increase of the performance and separation of the two response intervals. In other words, this control experiment told us that the effect of this learning was completely respective to the stimulus. It was not selective for the type of tunnel and when the stimuli and where the stimuli are presented. So it's generalized across these contextual stimuli.
So did you do the reversal on separate sessions? It was not like at the middle of a session you would reverse it. So
no, it was a whole different experimental session. So we changed the stimuli, the intervals related to the stimuli. We got other 7 participants that didn't know about the task. We gave them the same instruction as the naive group, so just produce an interval of time to avoid the path, and try to figure it out. And these were the results. So we saw basically the same recapitulation.
Okay. And then what is black and what is red and blue here? Red and
blue. So here we're showing the performance for the two
black
contexts.
Is the average.
Exactly. Black is the average of the two contexts.
And hit rate for eye blink, you mean CRs?
Yeah, precisely. That's a typo. Yeah. Okay, now I've been showing the naive group, I've been showing the control experiment, but now let's talk about using a cognitive strategy, which basically means giving more instruction to our participants. Why? Because we wanted to examine the role of an overt cognitive strategy and its impact on the acquisition timescale of both explicit and implicit temporal context, because there is a prominent literature on motor control, and I'm referring basically to this, mainly to these 2 papers, that suggest that strategy, so that we, as an interpretation from us, was more instructions, was accelerating explicit learning, but it has a more complex interaction with the implicit learning. So it can be both antagonistic or synchronistic to the implicit learning, depending on the nature of additional perturbations. So it kind of still remained unclear how an over strategy will impact on the acquisition of both timescale. So we expected a facilitation of the explicit learning because it's cognitive and giving more strategy means increasing the cognitions, but what about the implicit learning? So let's check our result. Here we used another group of people consisting of 27, and we told these people about the dual context nature of the experiment. So be aware that for the dark tunnel, you are required to produce 1 interval of time, and for the light tunnel, the interval of time that you are required to produce is different. So they had more information, and we regarded this additional information as introducing a cognitive strategy. Well, we can see that we referred to them as the strategy group. We see again another recapitulation of the same results as before. For the manual button press, as much for the time eye blink response. Again, over here I'm just showing the individual participant and the average of all the group. Here we're talking about the same participant. So whoever was the person that gave this response timing by pressing the spacebar is also the same that produced the well-timed eye blink condition response when the button press was correct. And here is the average of all of them. We still see that the condition responses are frequent and that they converge to stable values pretty rapidly. And as you can see, even more rapidly than the manual button press response, which again recapitulates, first of all, that the percentage of correct responses was significantly improved over the course of the experiment, as well as the overall condition response CR percentage. And again, here we see a separation in time of the eyelid condition response, meaning that, again, I started from the assumption that eye blink was very unflexible and simple. We still see, considering also the naive group, a response that based on the context, it occurs at different timings, but for a learning that is supposed to be completely implicit. Completely implicit, even more because, again, we gave them the questionnaire. Now, let's check first the acquisition time. So again, the rate, the trial number at which the responses were on average getting asymptotic to the desired value. And if you compare again the eye blink and the button press, we still see that the eyelid closure, when conditioned, was learned faster than the button press for both dark and light. Again, we wanted to give a measurement of our implicitness of the task, so we gave the participant the same questionnaire, and again, the awareness reported for the CR was significantly lower than the one reported for the unconditioned response, so the eyelid closure in the presence of the puff. And still, the CR was reported to be less, more implicit than the one for the manual button press task.
Luca, question. So the
yeah.
instructions were about reproducing, or not reproducing, like the 800 millisecond and 1600 millisecond. And did they also receive instructions that they will receive an air puff if they do outside? Like all of that was given.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were not told about the right timing. They were simply told that there is one interval that is short and there is one interval that is long. If you don't press the space bar within either one of those two, you will get puffed. Your task, your purpose is to avoid getting puffed. So try your best to press the space bar within these two different interval of times. So the difference between naive and strategy is that strategy people knew that for each context, the interval of time to be produced was supposed to be different.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Now, let's check the effect of strategy. So to investigate the systematic differences between the naive and the strategy group, we performed a two-way ANOVA analysis to examine the differences between, well, in the acquisition times, of course. So again, as the trial number at which they get asymptotic for each effector, so button press and condition response, for each context, dark and light. We found a significant main effect for the role of strategy for both dark and light context and for both effector. So these kind of demonstrate and showed us these results that using a cognitive overt strategy on our paradigm, giving them the instruction of the dual context nature of the experiment, made the acquisition rate more rapid and faster than the one that we saw for the naive group. So using a cognitive strategy synchronistically accelerates both explicit and implicit learning simultaneously. So these kind of recapitulates the analysis performed that are showing that implicit learning timescales are faster than the explicit timescale in the strategy compared to the naive. Then.
Okay, question, Luca.
Yes.
I'm very surprised by the effect of explicit on implicit here. So when they learn the button presses at the right time faster, that means that the air puffs that they will receive will stop faster, right? Because they're doing more correct, so fewer air puffs.
Yes. The fewer air puffs, they stop to be evoked faster than the one in the naive group. Yes.
Right. That can explain perhaps the magnitude of CR is potentially less in the strategy group compared to the naive group, I suppose, because they've received fewer air puffs. I don't know if you have quantifications of those, but it doesn't explain why the emergence of learning would be faster for eye blink conditioning in the strategy group. So
no, I agree that's why we kind of wanted to see what was happening on the implicit type of learning. So we were not surprised to see that the explicit was facilitated, but the effect on on the condition response might have been completely antagonistic or non-synergic. So what we saw was also very surprising for us. It's this eye blink conditioning that is learned faster and more rapidly because they got told that
this is very surprising. And my experience with eye blink conditioning is that mice learn faster when the air puff is stronger, for example. That definitely matters. For mice also, it matters whether they're body restrained or not. So if the less stressed they are, the faster they also learn that. But I'm curious what your interpretations are at the end of this and what mechanisms you think are underlying this.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you my interpretation and then I will welcome everybody to tell me what they think about it. So, well, actually, we're getting close to the end because finally, the other analysis that we performed was done to examine whether the eye blink and the manual button press response were fully distinct processes or partly dependent. So to check that the two effectors were not engaging the same system simultaneously or different system, we plot the correlation of the acquisition times for the eye blink condition and the strategy. So we found that the Pearson correlation coefficient was not revealing any significant correlation in any case except for this bottom left panel, which is the dark tunnel condition in the strategy group. This is something that I wanted to show because it still remained kind of unclear, and it didn't give me an explanation on how this process may be or not entirely distinct, and it can be interdependent. Well, one thing that we definitely see from these plots is that the acquisition of the eye blink, it's always on the top left part of this plot. So it is acquired faster, and therefore the correlation doesn't necessarily exist because they are all faster than the acquisition time of the button press.
Is each point here one session?
This is the acquisition time for each session for each participant. Yes.
And each point is one participant? One session, one participant?
Well, no, not one session. Each point is one participant. So
I average like all the sessions.
Yeah, the average of all the 3 sessions get averaged as in the plots that you saw until now, and for each participant there is one acquisition rate learning time for the button press and one acquisition time for the eye blink. Trying to plot them.
The faster eye blink acquisition rate for the strategy groups no, I don't think so. I mean, there are some subjects in the naive group that are really slow on the eye blink, like those few points.
Definitely the few points that are here.
But I think even if we exclude those, there is definitely the distribution is more on the shorter for eye blink. Yeah,
exactly. So there definitely are a few outliers, but these preference of the acquisition times to be on the left bottom left the top part of the plot demonstrate that there is a trend in acquiring the eye blink faster than the button press. And this is what we saw with the effect of strategy. And this brings me to the conclusions of this talk, in which I want to summarize that, well, first of all, contrary to what we thought being reports from motor neuroscience, we found that well-timed implicit responses were acquired faster than the well-timed explicit manual button press responses, so the explicit ones, as I just shown right now. The predictive eye blink responses were able to develop in a flexible, context-dependent manner. So the eye would preemptively close at different time based on the context. So dark tunnel, the eye would implicitly preemptively close at 800 and at 1600 for the light tunnel, just based on the contextual clue. And finally, that using a cognitive strategy was accelerating the learning of both explicit and implicit acquisition timescales. And the participants' implicit learning was remaining faster than the acquisition of the well-timed explicit responses for both dark and light while using the strategy. So both timescales were faster, even the the one for the implicit that were remaining still faster than the explicit responses, giving another confirmation of this first effect that we found. And with this, I would like to, if there is no other question by now, I would like to acknowledge Charlotte, master student that helped to develop and design the paradigm. Devika, my supervisor, for all the help and patience and teaching. And Marit, our technicians that helped with Bonsai and the acquisition of the data. And well, when there was a problem, Marit was always there. I want to also thank every member of the lab for everything they do all together and we do all together. And yeah, that's it. I want to thank you mainly for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe go to your conclusion slide while we're having a discussion.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to start and then please interrupt others if you have questions.
Of course.
So my guess is what's happening here is that in the explicit, they are more attentive. Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's go to that. I think what's happening is that in the explicit, because of these instructions, subjects are less bored, which means more attentive. There's an effect of arousal. And my speculation is that that's why it's an arousal-related effect on the eye blink conditioning. Unless you want to say you think it's more of a direct effect. Yeah, I'm curious what you guys think about what's going on here.
The speculation on the concept of using a strategy was pretty short. As in, we literally based ourselves on previous work. So especially from the two papers that I mentioned before. So they also consider the strategy giving a few additional information to the participants after they already performed the tasks to make a differentiation between what they could call naive or non-expert and strategy group. So I think it's a very valid point that they could be actually more aroused because the acknowledgement of for one context I have to produce one time and for another one I have to produce another one could actually mean that they are more engaged in the task itself because they get puffed less.
Did you guys try to measure the pupil?
No,
well, I mean,
that's
but
not
you guys
something
have it, right? Because you do have a video to measure the eye light.
Unfortunately not, because it's a infrared camera, so the distinction was, let me show you. So the pupil dilation, pupil is also in the there is no distinction between the colored part of the eye and the pupil. So
yeah.
to see the dilation of the pupil, it's impossible because the contour, the edge, it's still the colored part of the eye. So it's an infrared camera. So the light is turned off, forgive me, and the infrared camera is pointing to the eye. The difference is just between black and white to be able to then produce something like this. So 0 and 1, closed, open, open, closed. So the pupil dilation, unfortunately, is not part of the... But I think it's an extremely valid point because pupil dilation gives a very good readout for engagement in arousing the task.
And are you guys trying to do similar experiments with mice to look into the...
Precisely. So ideally, the task was designed for mice. Actually, the whole reason for which the virtual reality setup it's a tunnel. It's because this task was designed for mice that were supposed to run on a treadmill, on a circular treadmill, and with a smaller monitor placed in front of them. To be able to let them think that they're running within the tunnel. So that's why we kept, for consistency, we kept the same kind of setup for human beings. But initially, this was designed for mice because we could also get a electrophysiological readout. We could be able to record, ideally. But when I started as a PhD, we wanted, first of all, to check what is happening behaviorally speaking in human beings, and that's why this whole project came out. And now that we have these kind of results, we are already starting to perform the mice experiment. They are getting trained, and we will be able to perform electrophysiology in media prefrontal cortex and cerebellar cortex, so to distinguish between the explicit and the implicit type of learning. So to ascribe them to the respectful circuitry. And then we couple that to the behavior. So that's the subsequent idea for this project.
Amazing. And I had a question on implicit and explicit. So
Yes.
I guess it's fair and correct to call labeling implicit. But for the bottom press, supposedly when they become well trained, then at that point we can call it implicit. So no?
I've been thinking about it, but no, because well trained doesn't mean 100% of correct responses. So I don't think it become implicit whatsoever. And I do believe that at each trial, the participant is consciously thinking, I will have to press the spacebar at this time or at this time.
Yeah, especially because you guys randomize it, I agree.
Precisely. So
yes.
if it was 50% and 50% every time in blocks of like red and blue, black and light, dark and light, then I understand what you mean and I would completely agree. But since it's completely randomized, every time is not trivial at all. I think it's quite tricky for the for the participant to remember, okay, now this is light, now then I have to press the spacebar at this timing. So I do still think that it engages cognition every single time that the button press is performed.
Yeah. Okay. And then there are some quantifications that I was hoping to see. I don't know if you guys have it or not, just not shown here. One was I really want to see the percentage correct for the two strategies. Did we see? Oh, you did have it. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you did
that's
show
fine.
the
That's
hit
fine.
rate.
That's why the QA section is here.
And then how do these numbers compare between between strategy and naive?
They are completely overlapping because as you might see over here, they go up to a bit more than 50% both. And if I show the same for the...
It's just slower, but you're saying it reaches the same.
Yes, it's just lower, but the amount of correct response are the same. So here is a bit more than 50%, and here is basically 50%, staying the same.
How come they don't improve?
Because it gets very tiring. So at a certain point, even if you are the best performer, towards the end, the performance will slightly decrease. Actually,
and
if you
is it
see,
like one session per participant, or do you do multiple sessions for each participant?
3 sessions of 2 other trials each, and between each session, they can get they can choose to a break, to walk, to drink a glass of water. They can have up to 20 minutes between sessions. I do have to say that I most of the people that I ran as a subject participant, they were engaged in the task so much that a few refused to have breaks. So they stayed 1 hour and a half within the setup, pressing the spacebar constantly at each trial for 600 times without getting breaks. So at a certain point, I do believe it gets pretty tiring. But also, as you can see, the towards this last part of the trials of the session, there is a bit of a drop in both the manual response and the hybrid response. Well, this is consequential, of course, but here we see a bit of the diminishing in terms of percentage of correct responses because of this tiredness. They either they invert the timings. So what I've seen is also people that they were getting frustrated and angry at themselves because they were pressing the spacebar at the opposite time compared to the time that they actually had. And then they were like, oh no, now I remember it correctly, I have to press it at this time because this is the context. But also it's simply that at a certain point they actually get mentally and eye-wise they get tired. So we see a bit of a drop.
Yeah. And then do you have the plots of... Go ahead, Sana.
Sorry, but I know that you're more investigating the eye blink, but do you think there's some sort of single block adaptation, like they are more used to do the same thing that they did in the previous trial, even if the stimulus is different and they're in the different context? Is there any adaptation, some preference to do the same thing that they did previously?
Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting question. We try to assess the adaptation, but the point is, since the correctness of the button press was not maintained throughout all the sessions, even finishing the second session, for instance, with a very good level of correct responses, and then being placed again inside the setup to perform the third session, imply that the amount of incorrect manual button press responses was again still high. So again, they kind of had to relearn it every single time. So I don't think there was we don't believe there was about adaptation. So yeah, but I do think it's a very valid point. So it's we gave a qualitative assessment just by looking at the amount of time where the button press was correct, and therefore the eyelid closure was conditioned or not. And we qualitatively we say that the adaptation was not part of the process.
I get it. Thanks.
Do you guys have some actual eyelid traces? I'm very curious. A line on the cue or yeah.
So we do have. So what happens is in our setup, so we use Bonsai, and the video that is recorded by the camera is directly sent to Bonsai into the computer next to the behavioral computer, and it gets immediately online translated into this trace that is between 0 and 1, and it gets normalized. So we just get this kind of trace, and we don't have the video. We don't collect, also for privacy reasons. We don't collect the video of the eyelid closure. We online transform it into this curve to get to decide whether this is a eyelid closure response or not.
Right, but then you don't have it to go ahead and take an average and like so you don't.
No, we take it singularly. So we do store these, but for each single trial. So we have for each participant we have 600 of these traces, or even of these, of course, if there is no blink, which can definitely happen. But no, we never pulled an average out of that.
Yeah, because that would be. I know you quantify your onset timing, but I really like to see relative to the cue onset for the two contexts how these traces actually go up.
Yeah, I understand.
And it would be also very helpful to see a distribution of air puff timing for the two contexts. So I'm saying some of those can help me at least better understand why we are seeing this timing.
Well, distribution of the air puff, I definitely see what you mean. Distribution of the air puff can also be kind of seen and drawn from here, because each dot that is not within the emission window, it is an air puff. And therefore we see the distribution. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Luca. So
thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
For the purpose of recording, I'm going to say thank you. That was great. Very insightful for all of us. And have a great day.
You too. Okay. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you all.
Sure. So I will stop the recording here, but I do have some questions for you. The rest of you feel free to stay or leave. Okay, so I'm thinking of getting also fiber photometry for our lab. You can remove the.
Can I stop sharing you also, because I don't see you. I haven't seen you for 1 hour and a half.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Yes. Actually, I forgot to stop recording. Let me do this.
Yeah, you're still.
Let me just.
Hi YouTube. Hi everybody on YouTube.
I probably will.